what we're launching tonight is the outcome of 2 years of work where CDE collaborated with leading think tanks in India and Brazil. It's built on 12 commissioned research papers, 4 from each country, looking at democracy and growth, democracy and poverty, democracy and innovation, and democracy and corruption. What impact does democracy have? Is it relevant? Is it neutral? Is it positive? So this was an objective inquiry talking to getting work from the leading academics in those countries and experts in those countries, some of whom have had government experience. We then held workshops, high-level policy workshops in the 3 countries, in Delhi, in Rio, and in Johannesburg, where we debated the findings from all this research. And then we pulled together 3 country reports on what had we learnt about the 3 countries. On the basis of that and many conversations, I then wrote this short summary document on the so what of all of this, what the key findings. And so that's the report, The Democratic Alternative from the South, looking at India, Brazil, and South Africa, and what we've learned about this. In terms of what are the key takeaways, I can put this very quickly. Over the last 20-25 years, as a consequence of market-oriented reforms and macroeconomic fiscal discipline, 3 very different countries have had significant successes. They have maintained and strengthened their democracies and built their democracies in the case of India and Brazil, Brazil returning to democracy in 1988, South Africa becoming a democracy for the first time in 1994, and they have simultaneously maintained human rights and freedoms while growing their economies and bringing millions of people out of poverty into a better life. So the achievements of these 3 countries are significant. In the 2000s, buoyed by the global economy and the notion that higher economic growth was easy, the 3 countries behaved in a very similar way. And they started loosening their fiscal discipline, they started handing out more money through redistribution measures, and then 2008 and the financial crisis hit. And it took a while to permeate through developing countries, but these 3 societies are now in a dangerous and tricky phase of their development. They're struggling to get growth going again, and it might seem that 5.5% per annum in India is a fantastic growth rate, but when you think of the size of that population, it's not nearly enough. Brazil is about to record a 2nd year of 0% growth in 4 years, and South Africa is heading for a dismal 1.4% growth this year. So all 3 societies are at a critical turning point. They have to return to much higher growth, and that growth has to be much more inclusive. That means more labor intensive and bringing in people who've never worked before into their economies. What was fascinating about this research is how 3 very different societies actually have very similar challenges. They all are slipping in competitiveness as environments in which to do business. They have rigid labor markets. They're struggling to grow their manufacturing sectors. And this is particularly negative at a point where the workshop of the world, China, is experiencing higher wages, and there are millions, some estimate 86 million low-skill, low-wage manufacturing jobs that are going to move out of that country. India is not getting any of them, South Africa is not getting any of them, and the reason is the nature of our labor market. We're not allowing that kind of investment or we're not encouraging that kind of investment because of the rules and trade union opposition. All 3 countries are struggling to deliver the infrastructure they need for growth, mainly because they have too statist an approach, and they're not involving the private sector in a myriad of different arrangements where you can have partnerships and the country can benefit. So you go through all the structural challenges that they face. They all have terrible education systems for the vast majority of people, and it's really striking how similar they are. We're saying that democracies can leverage the institutions and advantages of flexible politics, freedom of speech, diverse sources of information in order to build new coalitions to implement what we're calling a second wave of reforms that are so vitally needed. These reforms are not only in the economic sphere, important as that is, all three countries have to ensure they have more effective states. In India and South Africa, the state has become a vehicle of self-enrichment in many cases, not all, and a place that serves the people who work there rather than a service to the public. Brazil is slightly better, but also has problems in this area. So state competence and capacity is absolutely vital. So reforms are required there. Reforms are also required with respect to deepening the democracy in each one of these countries. They need to expand accountability, transparency, and representative sort of accountability, really, at city, state, and national levels to ensure they hold on to their democratic advantages and deepen those so that they can be more effective democracies. And in the fourth area, all three countries have had various policies of how to deal with disadvantage and discrimination for vast numbers of people in the past. Some of these have worked. Bolsa Familiar in Brazil is one particular example, but it's not been as important as many people think. Urbanization and employment have been much more important in getting millions of Brazilians out of poverty into the lower middle class. But we're saying that the time is ripe in all three countries for a major reassessment of how they deal with redress for past injustices and inclusion of the poor. So those are the key reforms we're calling for. But we're saying overall that there is an emerging democratic alternative coming from these southern countries, that in the global battle between authoritarian and democratic approaches to growth and development and the alleviation of poverty, you don't have to give up human rights and freedoms in order to become a more developed society. And that if these three countries can implement these reforms, and they can consolidate their democracies and get back to higher and more inclusive growth, you really will have a very serious democratic alternative emerging from the South, which is absolutely vital for the future of democracy and market economies or capitalism in the world in the next few decades.